Alexander. Chapter 1. In general. All early history is a record of wars. Peace was too uneventful to call for record, but mere record cannot fashion a science. The art of war has been created by the intellectual conceptions of a few great captains. It has been reduced to a science by the analysis of their recorded deeds. Strategy is war on the map. Tactics is battlefield maneuvering. Both depend less on rules than on the brain, courage, and activity of the captain. Strategy has been of slow growth and was, as a science, unknown to the ancients. Tactics was highly developed, as were, within given limits, logistics and engineering. No study is so fruitful to the soldier as that of the history of great captains. From their deeds alone can the true instinct of war be gleaned. These pages propose to sketch briefly the typical events and the status of armies antedating Alexander, to show what then was already known of war, and by a relation of Alexander's campaigns to illustrate his influence upon the art. The earliest histories are but a record of wars. The seasons of peace were too uneventful to call for historians. The sharply defined events which arrest attention, because followed by political or territorial changes, have always been wars, and these have been the subject matter of nearly all early writings. The greatest of poems would never have seen the light, and had not Homer been inspired by the warlike deeds of heroes, nor would Herodotus and Thucydides have penned their invaluable pages, had not the stirring events of the Persian and Peloponnesian wars impelled them to the task. Xenophon, Arrian, Caesar are strictly military historians, and the works of the other great writers of ancient history contain only the rehearsal of wars held together by a network of political conditions influencing these struggles. It is indeed peculiarly in the fact that war is now subordinated to peace that our modern civilization differs from that of the ancients. And but within a couple of generations can it be truly claimed that the arts of peace have assumed more prominence than the arts of war? Again, that's not a question. That's an assertion. Or no, wait a minute now. Let's reread that. It is indeed peculiarly in the fact that war is now subordinated to peace that our modern civilization differs from that of the ancients, and but within a couple of generations can be truly claimed that the arts of peace have assumed more prominence than the arts of war. So long as war remains the eventual arbitrament of all national disputes, so long must the arts of peace contribute to the art of war, and so long must this be studied, and an active interest in the deeds of the great captains be maintained. The art of war has been created by the intellectual conceptions of a few great captains. It is best studied in the story of their triumphs. The mesmerizing of technical rules can teach but the detail of the art. The lessons contained in what the masters did can be learned only by an intelligent analysis of the events themselves. The inspiration essential to success can be caught only by assimilation of their methods. Nothing is so fruitful to the soldier as to study closely the character and intellect of these great men, and to make himself familiar with the events which they have illustrated. Few topics have greater interest for the layman. Less than a generation since we, Americans, were a nation of soldiers. In 4 years, something like 4 millions of men had worn the blue and gray. In 4 years, something like 4 millions of men have worn the blue or gray. And it does read millions. millions. 4 millions instead of 4 million. I don't know if that was the style of writing at that time or speech, but willing to bet so. I don't know. In the autumn of their life, many of these veterans may enjoy the comparison of their own campaigns with those of the men whom all unite in calling the masters of the art. To such my work is principally addressed. Strategy has been aptly described as the art of making war upon the map. Nor is this a mere figure of speech. Napoleon always planned and conducted his campaigns on maps of the country spread out for him by his staff, and into these maps he stuck colored pins to indicate where his divisions were to move. Having thus wrought out his plan, he issued orders accordingly. To the general, the map is a cheese board, and upon this he moves his troops as players move queen and knight. Strategy is, in other words, the art of which a general so moves his army about the country in relation to, but beyond the proximity of the enemy, that when he finally reaches him, the enemy shall be placed in a disadvantaged position for battle or other maneuver. The moments of an army in the immediate presence of the enemy or on the field of battle belong to the domain of grand tactics. Strategy is the common law or common sense of war. As the common law has arisen from the decisions of great judges relating to the common affairs of life, so strategy has arisen from the action of the great masters of war in the events they were called on to control. The word is very properly derived from strategos, the name given by the Greeks to the leader of a certain unit of service, to a general. It is not the army, nor the people, nor the territory, nor the cause which are the origin of strategic movements, though indeed all these bear their due part in the calculation. It is the head and heart of the leader which always have furnished and always must furnish the strategic values of every campaign. From his intellectual and moral vigor, in other words, his personal equipment, must ever come the motive power and direction. Strategy has its rules, like every science. Until within a little over a century, these have been unwritten. They are in principle inflexible, in practice elastic. They are but the tools of the trade, the nomenclature of the science, the Barbara Kellerant of logic. The strictness of laxity of the maxims of strategy is measured by the ability of the general. The second-rate commander transcends them at his peril. For the great captain, they vary as the conditions vary. The man who can rise superior to mere rules and succeed has always a spark of genius. But as these maxims are, like those of the common law, nothing but a statement of what is the highest common sense, the genius who makes exceptions to them does so because the circumstances warrant the exception, or because he feels that he can control circumstances. The great captain will never permit mere rules to tie his hands, but his action will always be in general, if not specific, accordance with them. The one thing which distinguishes the great captains of history from the rank and file of commanders is that they have known when to disregard maxims, and that they have succeeded while disregarding them, and because of their disregard of them. But in all cases their successes have proved the rule. The first requisite of oratory, said Demosthenes, is action. The second action, the third action. In this generation of conversational speeches, the saying is less applicable to oratory than to strategy and tactics. It is the general who can think rapidly and more rapidly, who can originate correct lines of maneuver and unceasingly and skillfully follow them, who becomes great. The few instances of Fabian tactics are but the complement to this rule. They prove its truth. Fabius Maximus was in one sense as active as Hannibal. It was mainly in the avoidance of armed conflict that he differed from the great Carthaginian. How indeed could he follow each movement of his wonderful antagonist, as he did, unless his every faculty was in constant action? Incessant action is not of necessity unceasing motion. It is motion in the right direction at the right moment, though indeed it is the legs of an army as much as its stomach which enable the brain tissue and throbbing blood of the captain to conduct a successful campaign or win a pitched battle. Strategy has been a growth like other sciences. So far, the subheadings on the last few pages have been the art of war, strategy, and action, action, action. And this next one is strategy, a growth. And a footnote. Personal footnote. Its earliest manifestation was in the ruthless invasion of one barbarian tribe of the territory of another in search of bread, metals, wives, or plunder of any kind. The greater or less skill or rapidity of such an invasion, by which the population attacked was taken unawares or at a disadvantage, meant success or failure. Thus grew offensive strategy. The invaded people cut the roads, blocked the defiles, defended the fords of the river, lay in ambush in the forest. The ability shown in these simple operations originated the strategy of defense. Often the strong, relying on their strength, showed the least ability, the weak conscious of their weakness the most. Again, often the strong, relying on their strength, showed the least ability, the weak, conscious of their weakness, the most. From such simple beginnings has grown up the science and art of war, which today, among the greatest nations, saving always our own happily exempt America, embraces all arts and sciences, and makes them each and all primarily subservient to its demands. As with strategy, so tactics, logistics, and engineering came to perfection by a slow growth in ancient and modern times. The tactics of organization and drill rose to a high degree among the ancients. The tactics of the battlefield were sometimes superb. Logistics were simpler, for armies were neither large nor carried such enormous supplies of material. Engineering, as exemplified at the sieges of Tyre, Rhodes, and Alesia, has rarely been equaled in the adaptation of the means at hand to the end to be accomplished. War is scarcely more perfect today, according to our resources in arts and mechanics, than it was 20-odd centuries ago among the Greeks, according to theirs. It is not, however, the purpose of these pages to discourse upon the art of war. It will be a far more pleasant task to tell the story of the great captains whose deeds have created this art, and through them, by unvarnished comment, to lay open to the friendly reader the rules and maxims which govern or limit strategy and tactics. And the subheading above the page here is Purpose of this work. And before coming to the first, and perhaps the greatest of all, Alexander of Macedon, it is proposed to describe briefly the armies antedating his, to say something about his predecessors in the art, and to give a short account of a very few of their campaigns or battles, in order to show what equipment this wonderful soldier possessed when a mere lad. He undertook as Captain General of the smallest and yet greatest nation on earth, Greece, the expedition against the stupendous power of the Persian Empire, and thus placed the weight of the world upon his youthful shoulders. This cannot readily be done in a well-connected historical narrative. Many noted wars and brilliant generals must be omitted. The instances and commanders to be quoted will be but typical of the rest, and will illustrate the gradual advance from unintelligent to intellectual warfare. A history of war must embrace all wars and battles, small and great. A history of the art of war may confine itself to narrating such typical wars and battles as best illustrate its growth. And the author included a contour drawing of a Persian noble here. End of chapter 1.